This is Newsday on the BBC. I'm Rico Hizon in Singapore. The top stories. The U.S. joins Britain in blaming Russia for last week's nerve agent attack. At the United Nations, its ambassador demands action.
The credibility of this council will not survive if we fail to hold Russia accountable.
Moscow again denies any involvement in the attack.
We demand that material proof be provided of the allegedly found Russian trace in this high-resonance event.
I'm Sharon Duke-Lale in London, also on the programme.
I am very proud that I have been able to contribute to our understanding of the universe.
The world pays tribute to visionary physicist Stephen Hawking, who's age of 76. And 10 plastic particles per litre, growing concerns over many brands of bottled water.
Live from our studios in Singapore and London. This is BBC World News. It's Newsday.
Thanks for joining us. It's 9 in the morning here in Singapore, 1 a.m. in London, and 9 in the evening in New York, where Britain requested an emergency meeting of the United Nations Security Council to discuss the use of a nerve agent to poison a Russian spy and his daughter. But the British ambassador said it was a reckless act and said Russia was to blame. Earlier in London, British Prime Minister Theresa May went to Parliament to say what she planned to do about it. It is the most dramatic action against Moscow in 30 years. Our political editor, Laura Kuensberg, has more.
It was right to offer Russia the opportunity to provide an explanation. But their response has demonstrated complete disdain for the gravity of these events.
The midnight deadline came and went, leaving a morning with no new answers. Theresa May went prepared to Prime Minister's questions, ready to announce the biggest diplomatic action against Russia since the Cold War.
They have treated the use of a military-grade nerve agent in Europe with sarcasm, contempt and defiance. So, Mr. Speaker, there is no alternative conclusion other than that the Russian state was culpable for the attempted murder of Mr. Skripal and his daughter. This represents an unlawful use of force by the Russian state against the United Kingdom.
So the UK will retaliate.
The United Kingdom will now expel 23 Russian diplomats who have been identified as undeclared intelligence officers. They have just 1 week to leave. This was not just an act of attempted murder in Salisbury, nor just an act against the UK. It is an affront to the prohibition on the use of chemical weapons. And it is an affront to the rules-based system on which we and our international partners depend.
So 23 diplomats suspected of being spies have 7 days to leave. All high-level contact between the UK and Russia is also being suspended, and no minister or member of the royal family will go to the World Cup. And some Russian state assets could be frozen, with possible new laws to crack down on hostile states. Anger displayed in Westminster that this is happening on British streets. In Dorset today, the lorry that removed the Skripal's car seized. In Salisbury, the bench where father and daughter were found still sealed off, while the Prime Minister makes her opening moves in a diplomatic tangle that could last. Laura Kuensberg, BBC News, Westminster.
Now, while Britain's allies, including the US and EU, have offered support, Russia has dismissed Prime Minister May's words as a political show. Speaking at the UN debate in New York, the Russian ambassador to the UN denied Moscow's involvement in the attack.
We were given an ultimatum and requested in 24 hours to admit that we committed a crime. In other words, confess. We do not speak the language of ultimatums. We do not use that language with anyone, and we will not allow to be spoken to in that language either. We demand that material proof be provided of the allegedly found Russian trace in this high-resonance event.
Well, also making news today, the Syrian army has continued its advance on eastern Ghouta, entering a key rebel-held town. The Syrian government's been trying to capture the area, which is the last big opposition-held area near Damascus, in a fierce offensive that began in mid-February. The European Parliament has revealed that it has been holding secret talks with North Korea in an attempt to negotiate an end to their nuclear program. The group said it has met senior officials 14 times over the last 3 years and plans another meeting in Brussels in the near future. A Democrat has claimed victory in a congressional race in western Pennsylvania. The strong showing by the former Marine Conor Lamb in a district Donald Trump won by nearly 20 points in 2016 could set the tone for November's U.S. midterm polls. And in sport, and I know it's your favourite sport, Rico, the Spanish football giants Barcelona have booked their place in the last 8 of Europe's most prestigious competition. This is the Champions League, and that's because they beat Chelsea 3-0.
Tributes have been pouring in from around the world for the renowned physicist Professor Stephen Hawking, who's died at the age of 76. Famous for his work on black holes and relativity, he was diagnosed with motor neuron disease in 1964. And over the subsequent decades, he shaped modern cosmology. David Schuckman looks back at a remarkable life and career.
There is nothing like the eureka moment of discovering something that no one knew before.
Stephen Hawking had a gift for inspiration, a powerful spirit overcoming an ailing body to allow a mind to roam through the cosmos. It earned him a place as the most famous scientist in the world.
It has been a glorious time to be alive and doing research in theoretical physics.
Who else could draw crowds like this? The man who gazed at the stars became one himself. His story both poignant and uplifting. His career involved concepts so alien, so complicated, that for most people it's been a struggle to keep up. But he was exploring those strangest of features of the universe, black holes, drawing together the science of the very largest things in space with the science of the very small, part of a quest to come up with a single theory for the universe.
He made these incredibly original insights which set up the modern theory of black holes and made great contributions to cosmology. And so, you know, he was a huge figure.
I was devastated, really upset. I'd only met him a couple of times, but he had a real impact on my life. And I think it is the passing of a great scientist. He will be truly sorely missed.
Even as a young student, his intelligence stood out, but at just that moment he was given a warning that motor neuron disease would cut his life short.
When I was diagnosed at 21, I was told it would kill me in 2 or 3 years.
But somehow he kept going, in a high-tech wheelchair and with a synthesized voice.
I am happier now than before I developed the condition.
Communicating first by touch, then by twitching a single muscle in his cheek. A daunting burden for anyone. His children saw him as an example.
People who've lived in really extreme circumstances seem to find something very, very inspirational in his example of perseverance and persistence and his kind of ability to rise above his suffering and still want to communicate at a higher level.
Life was never straightforward. His first marriage ended in divorce, as did a second marriage to one of his nurses. Claims had emerged that he'd been physically abused. The case was dropped for lack of evidence. None of this held him back. His book, A Brief History of Time, sold at least 10 million copies. And everyone has wanted to meet him, from the Pope in the Vatican to the Queen,
nice to see you again,
to President Obama, who awarded him a Medal of Honor. And his fame reached far beyond the world of science.
Your theory of a donut-shaped universe is intriguing, Homer. I may have to steal it.
Wow. Even appearing in The Simpsons.
I didn't say that.
Yes, I did.
In an episode of Star Trek, he was given the chance to tease Isaac Newton.
Not the Apple story again.
Astounding to think the Lord created all this in just 7 days.
Incorrect. that took 13.8 billion years.
Well, let's not get bogged down in all that again.
And more recently, he was happy to play along for comic relief. He saw himself as an ambassador for science. In this interview, he told me of his hopes for the Large Hadron Collider. He had a real sense of adventure.
As you can imagine, I am very excited. I have been wheelchair-bound for almost 4 decades, and the chance to float free in zero-G will be wonderful.
Even braving a zero-gravity flight. No surprise, his death has prompted a flood of tributes. Tim Berners-Lee, founder of the World Wide Web, tweeted, "We have lost a colossal mind and a wonderful spirit. Rest in peace, Stephen Hawking." And NASA said, "May you keep flying like Superman in microgravity," as you said to astronauts on the International Space Station in 2014.
If you reverse time, and the universe is getting smaller.
All right.
Eddie Redmayne played Stephen Hawking in the film The Theory of Everything. Today he said, "We've lost a truly beautiful mind." A scientist who delved into the weird realm of black holes offered an incredibly engaging story that achieved something remarkable. It touched a global audience.
That's Professor Stephen Hawking, who's died at the age of 76. Now, defense lawyers for the 2 women accused of the murder of Kim Jong-nam, the estranged half-brother of North Korean leader Kim Jong-un, has told a Malaysian court that the police's investigation was shoddy and could result in an unfair trial. Kim was poisoned at Kuala Lumpur's international airport in February last year. The 2 women deny the charges and say they thought they were appearing on a TV show. Well, a short time ago I spoke to our correspondent Jonathan Head in Bangkok, who's been following the trial.
I think what is really becoming very clear is how limited the police case is. You have to remember, and this is what's so bizarre about this case, everybody had hoped that the trial would unravel all the unknown threads of this mystery, particularly the role of the North Korean government, which seems to be very clear given the known agents who were connected to these women. The prosecution, and one presumes the government supports this, has chosen not to try to explore the role of North Korea at all. They focus solely on these 2 women, and they are trying to persuade the court that the women knew they were carrying the deadly nerve agent VX, that they were responsible for willful murder. That case, the defense lawyer is saying, is falling apart. In fact, among the witnesses that have been brought by the prosecution, they've relied very heavily on just one chief investigating officer. And he's been cross-examined by the defense time and again, exposing holes in the evidence he does have in the security camera footage, for example, from the airport, saying there's a lot we haven't seen, there are gaps in the time-lapse, we don't really have proof of what the women did, apart from the brief glimpse we get of the Vietnamese woman going up behind Kim Jong-nam and apparently wiping something on him. But bringing up in this latest hearing the fact that there is clear evidence from witnesses the police have not bothered to interview in Vietnam that the Vietnamese woman Doan Thi Huang was actually recruited 2 months before and carried out practice pranks. Very strong evidence that indeed she did believe she was taking part in some kind of video show. And really, the more we hear from the cross-examiner of the prosecution, the more baffling it is that they haven't been able to present a stronger case.
Baffling indeed, as you say, Jonathan. You mentioned the 4 known agents who were North Korean. Of course, they fled. They're on an Interpol list as well, with red warrants on for their arrests issued last year. But of course, we don't know where they are at the moment. So will justice ever be served in this case?
No, I doubt it very much, and I think that's a reality Malaysia is having to confront. The problem really is that very early on in this case, for reasons that are, I suppose, to do with the nature of the North Korean regime, the Malaysian government decided simply not to mention the North Korean government's role. It's only ever been mentioned once by Prime Minister Najib. They focused on the crime itself. They certainly focused very angrily on the North Korean reaction when the North Koreans accused them of politicizing the investigation. And of course there was this time where Malaysians were held in the Prime Minister's words, hostage in North Korea. That was the point at which 3 North Koreans being held in Malaysia were released. And again, one of those people we think may have been a key person. It may have been this man who recruited Siti Aisyah, the Indonesian, and it seemed he wasn't even interviewed. The police investigating officers said, we didn't interview him or take his phone or anything because we didn't have orders to do it. 2 others who had a much more minor in the embassy were allowed to leave. Those original 4 who left on the day of the killing, who clearly played a key role, were not even really clear about their identities. The prosecution is saying that they are 2 people who were known as James, and there seems to be some confusion in their minds even about which one was actually the James who recruited the Indonesian. So there's a huge amount of confusion that's been allowed to get into the prosecution's case, and everyone knows those 4 agents almost certainly are back in North Korea, and there is no way, of course, that the North Korean government will cooperate in finding out what their role was.
Jonathan Head there in Bangkok, speaking earlier to Sharon. You're watching Newsday on the BBC, live from Singapore and London. Still to come on the program. What's in our bottled water? A special investigation discovers hundreds, even thousands of tiny particles of plastic in a number of leading brands.
And also coming up, a month after the Florida school shooting, students across the U.S. walk out of their classrooms to demand tighter gun controls.
It's Newsday on the BBC. I'm Rico Hizon in Singapore.
Thanks for staying with us. I'm Sharon Jitlale in London. Our top stories. The US says it agrees with Britain that Russia was behind the nerve agent attack that poisoned a former spy and his daughter on UK soil. Russia has dismissed the allegation.
The world has paid tribute to Professor Stephen Hawking, the world-famous physicist and author who has died at the age of 76. Let's now take a look at some of the front pages from around the world, and we start off with the Philippine Star Online edition and President Rodrigo Duterte's plans to take his country out of the International Criminal Court. Well, last month, the ICC began examining alleged crimes committed during the president's controversial crackdown on drugs. Shifting now our attention to the front page of the Hong Kong South China Morning Post, and an indication of just how popular the late Stephen Hawking was in China. His book, A Brief History of Time, was one of China's biggest-selling translated books. When he visited the mainland in 2006, state media compared his appeal to that of Hollywood superstar Tom Cruise. And turning the page now to the Straits Times newspaper of Singapore, and it warns that fake news could be the city-state's biggest threat. A government hearing was told that this would apply especially to foreign powers who want to attack Singapore but cannot do so using military means. And those are the top stories of leading publications around the world. And Sharon, in trending, which stories are sparking discussions online?
Well, a somewhat disturbing story, Rico, if you depends on how you look at it, really. This is a startup company. It's called Nectome. They've said that they will one day be capable of scanning the human brain and preserving it, and perhaps running a deceased person's mind as a computer simulation. But the company admits that the process of backing up your brain will come with the ultimate price: death. Nectome told a science journal that their product is 100% fatal. Now, the teenager accused of the Parkland school shooting in Florida has appeared in court, charged with 17 counts of premeditated murder. The deaths have inspired young people across the United States to take action to demand tighter gun safety laws. On Wednesday, thousands of them walked out of their classrooms to stage a 17-minute protest to represent each of those who were killed. Here's our North America editor, John Sobel.
The last time we saw children pouring out of school, it was with their hands up in terror after the Florida shooting. Today they came out across America, but this time with fists clenched, demanding change on gun control.
What do we want? Gun control! When do we want it? Now!
At 10 o'clock on a bracing cold morning, with their backs turned on the White House, these students fell silent for 17 minutes. A minute for each of the people who died at the Marjory Stoneman Douglas School in Florida last month.
There's no doubting the extraordinary success these young people have had in changing the whole terms of debate on the subject of gun control in America. Their problem is that the man who lives on the other side of that fence seems to have got cold feet.
When Donald Trump met youngsters from the Florida school at the White House, he seemed to offer his support for tougher gun control measures, like raising to 21 the age at which you can buy a rifle. And he later chided lawmakers for being frightened of the National Rifle Association.
Some of you people are petrified of the NRA. You can't be petrified.
But he's now backed off those proposals, and so the young people are intensifying their campaign.
We want them to pass common sense gun reform. We want to ban assault rifles. It's everything. We don't want to be scared in school. It should be our safest institution.
We are tired of being scared. We want actual change. We want it to happen with this protest.
This is what democracy looks like!
This is a curtain raiser to a mass demonstration in Washington in 10 days' time. They're a long way from getting what they want, but the power of youth protest has got them further than anyone could have imagined. And they're not in any mood to surrender. John Sokol, BBC News, Washington.
Scientists have discovered tiny particles of plastic in bottled drinking water. Research commissioned by journalists at Orb Media studied more than 250 bottles of water from 11 brands. Some bottles had no particles, but others had hundreds or even thousands of particles, some the width of a human hair. Food safety experts say the levels of plastic found do not make the water unsafe, but they're calling for more research. David Schuckman has the details.
Bottles of water are a feature of everyday life around the world. But new tests commissioned by journalists at Orb Media have discovered something unexpected: tiny particles of plastic in the water. At this lab in New York State, tests were carried out on more than 250 bottles. A special kind of dye was added that's known to stick to pieces of plastic.
Under certain wavelengths of light, it causes them to sparkle like stars in a night sky.
On average per litre, there were 10 large particles, each larger than the width of a typical human hair and confirmed as being plastic. Smaller particles were also found, on average 314 per litre. They weren't confirmed, but were probably plastic. At the moment, there are no rules covering these microplastics or any agreed way of checking for them.
It's an indication that we should be concerned. It's not catastrophic, the numbers that we're seeing, but it's concerning. And especially if you look at then, if you're drinking only bottled water and you do this every day over, a year, you're literally talking thousands of pieces of plastic that you're ingesting just simply from the bottled water that you're drinking.
We contacted all the companies involved. Nestlé told us to date we have not found microplastic compounds beyond a trace level in our products. Danone, which owns Evian, said of the study that the methodology used is unclear and that there were no rules on microplastics. Coca-Cola, which makes Dasani, said that microplastics seem to be everywhere and therefore may be found at minute levels even in highly treated products. This is the first time that bottled water has been tested for plastic on this scale. 11 different brands bought in 9 different countries. And in almost every case, the researchers have found some plastic. So the big question is what this might mean for our health. The Food Standards Agency says it's unlikely that microplastics could cause harm. But the World Health Organization now wants to review the evidence. And scientists say more research is needed.
As we become more aware of the prevalence of microplastics and the potential harm that they might cause, I think we need to start thinking now about how we can reduce those inputs so that we're not stoking up a huge problem for the future.
The advice, where water supplies are dirty, is that bottled water is far safer. But this study does raise questions about where plastic can end up and whether the tiniest pieces could affect our health. David Schuckman, BBC News in New York State.
And you've been watching Newsday on the BBC. I'm Rico Hizon in Singapore. Stay with us. The changing of the guard. We'll take a look at TV commentator Lawrence Kudlow, who becomes Donald Trump's top economic advisor after Gary Cohn. Does this solve the disagreement over tariffs?
And before we go, a reminder of our top story. Britain has told the UN Security Council that Russia has violated the Convention on the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons by attacking a former Russian double agent on its soil. Russia has dismissed the allegation, and Britain has expelled some 23 Russian diplomats who are being given a week to leave. That's it for now. Stay with us on BBC World News.
Hello there. 14 degrees yesterday in London.